Hi, I'm Lauren Edmonds. I'm the founder and owner of a school that supports children with learning delays. I'm hoping this space gives you something to think about. I want to talk about failure because it is a concept that is so close to my heart. It's part of my lived experience as a human being, and as all of you would have a lived experience of failure, and my daughter's failure and how the system handled it and understood it and what they did with it compared to what I do with it. And more is sitting in the sphere of knowledge, in the learning sphere these days, around what failure means. The research is coming out into mainstream and we're able to access it. And I'm wondering if you're thinking about failure and how you're thinking about failure and what it means. So when you are faced with a child who the system is saying is failing, the response that parents have is quite interesting. The response that the system has is quite interesting. The system tends to want to get you out because they don't know what to do with failure. And I find that fascinating because learning happens in failure. It doesn't happen in success. When I know how to do something, it means I've already learned it. I've got success. That portion of learning is finished. I need to push myself to failure so that I can learn and grow. I mean, we think of it in terms of physical development. We push our muscles to the point of failure so that they repair stronger and they learn and grow. And we need to do the same with our brains. We need to do the same with our learning process. So failure is an opportunity to know what isn't working and to apply our mind and our attention and our focus onto what is happening and what can we do differently. It should be turning our learning switch on. If you know the work of Anat Baniel, you'll know that one of her 9 essentials, I think it's the 7th one, is that she calls it the learning switch. And she talks about it. I've quoted it in the podcast before where I talk about curiosity. And she says when the switch is turned on, it can be on a higher setting for your child to be a more powerful learner or on a lower setting for a less effective learner. Now, we turn on our learning switch through activation. And if we can teach our children that failure is an activation for curiosity, which turns into an activation for learning, then our children who are struggling will ultimately become more powerful learners than the child who's not struggling. Imagine that. Imagine that as an optimistic view of learning difficulties, that when our child makes mistakes or fails, there's an opportunity to build their brain into a more powerful brain. So we need to also understand what failure and mistakes look like and what they mean, and also what we do with that in order to turn it into a learning opportunity. So when a child fails or makes a mistake, if we turn it into a fixed thing, so you can go and look at Carol Dweck's work around fixed mindset and growth mindset, but if we turn it into something that is fixed and we make it into a trait, so we talk about, you failed, you must be stupid. You failed, you're no good. Or you passed, you're clever. You passed, you got 90%, you're smart, you're amazing. It becomes this fixed trait. Now, learning is not a fixed thing. Learning, we talk about lifelong learning or being a lifelong learner in the sense that can you continually grow and improve yourself. And that is a skill. That's not just a state of mind. It's also a state of mind, but it's also a skill. When I fail at something, is my automatic response dejection? Is that the right word? Is my automatic response feeling bad about myself and I'm a failure? Do you place labels on yourself, or do you go, that's interesting, I failed at that. I wonder why. I wonder what we can do differently. Now, when your child is 5, 6, 7 years old, maybe even 12 years old, it's difficult for them to have that language at that point. So it's got to be your language as an adult. Oh, that's interesting. I see that you didn't get that right. Can we take a look at it? Can we look at your thinking? Can we try it again? Can we try it again differently? And your tone of voice, your attitude, and your words that you use can turn failure into this, that's interesting. Let's turn it around and let's look at it differently. Reuven Feuerstein in his mediated learning work talks about it as being an optimistic alternative. If we chose one path and that didn't work, do we see it as an opportunity to stop? Or do we see it as an opportunity to try a different path? And if that doesn't work, do we try another way until our brains and our thinking become stronger thinkers, more powerful cognitive entities? So this idea of failure and mistakes, if we can position it positively, we can position it from a growth experience for children, they will never get stuck in their mistakes and their failures. They will always see them as opportunities to try something else. And in that opportunity, they develop their thinking skills. And that's what we want. We want children who think. We don't want children who are automatic, children that can't see alternatives, that see 5 times 5 is 25 as a rote experience rather than an understanding that it's 5 taken 5 times, which turns into 25, which is skip counting of 5s, which is 5 groups of 5. And if we turn it around, and it's a division thing, and we start to play with these numbers and we start to play with shapes, that 5 times 5 is actually a 2D shape. It's perimeter. It's area. That it's expanded. How do we put it in expanded notation? How do we push it out? That 5 times 5 is actually 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5. When we start understanding that, and then we also just remember, quickly, 5 times 5 is 25. Now we've got a thinking brain. And it doesn't matter really what children think about, as long as they're developing the thinking skills. And when it comes to school and academics and curriculum, we want to push them down paths of mathematics and literacy for sure. And we can develop thinking skills around that as well. But actually, thinking skills are just thinking skills. So you're at home at night, you're trying to figure out what to have for dinner. Let's use thinking skills. Well, how are we going to figure this out? Well, we know these recipes, but what's in the fridge? What does everybody like? How many people are we having? Critical thinking, lateral thinking, problem-solving skills. That's the same skill that children are using when they're doing their multiplication tables, or when they're doing a comprehension, or trying to figure out the spelling of a word. Now, all of that can be built with the idea of mistakes and failure is just a path that you took, and you can choose another way, another option, as long as you have an attitude to failure that is of curiosity rather than an endpoint, a reflection of self, a trait, something that gets stuck on you as a label. No. Failure and mistakes are exactly where the learning is happening. Now, if we take it into a physical realm, for example, so if I'm going to play a sport, or perhaps I've got cerebral palsy and I'm struggling to use my limbs to walk, for instance, or whatever it is that's going on with me, as long as my body and my brain are still connected, how am I using my thinking around failure to develop real skill rather than fake skill? So a lot of children get to high school and get to matric and they've learned mathematical formulas that they don't really understand. They're just plugging in a formula. And if they can learn to plug in the right formula, they'll do pretty well at maths, but they actually still don't understand it. It's a very similar thing to a body that hasn't figured out yet how to walk. Now, if we put that body into braces, and it's very interesting to listen to Anat Banil's work, because she talks into this, and I'm not a medical professional, so I'm going to lean on her knowledge. But she talks about if we mechanically take a child's legs and we move them forward with our hands, and we call that walking, no, the child actually learned a failed form of walking. So we don't want to force automatic behaviors that look like success but actually are failures. We would rather have real failure and an attitude to failure that sparks the child's brain for, let me try something else. How does this feel? Does it feel right? How can I move differently? Now, if your child has difficulties beyond just something that would be easily sorted out at home, or with extra lessons, or with a little bit of therapy, if they've got a lot of disability under their belt, you really want high levels of intervention at this stage. But ultimately, if you as a parent and you as a general teacher can understand that failure and mistakes are opportunities to learn about what we did, to be more engaged with our approach, with our thinking, with our emotions, with what worked, with what didn't work, that engagement, that learning brain that's switched on, can then start to mold and adjust an approach in order to find a way. And then with expert mediation and teaching into that, the child finds their way through their difficulty, their disability. So if we've got a child who's diagnosed with dyslexia, for example, we can fix that child in their dyslexia at an age of 6, 7, 8, and then they will never progress beyond that. Or we can give them a mindset of, interesting, this that you wrote is very different to what I wrote. Can we see, how is it different? What are you thinking? Can we try it differently? And what I love about this approach is if a child comes up with a strategy to try something differently, you don't shut it down as an adult, even if you're convinced it's not going to work. You allow them to move through that strategy. And if it doesn't work, you don't go, I told you so, because then you're shutting them down again. You allow them to use the strategy and you go, well, that's such an interesting strategy. Can I help you with it? Let's use it. Did that work? What answer are we trying to get to? Oh, okay, no, that's interesting. Should we tweak that? What else can we do? Now you're developing a brain that has possibility thinking. And that is the power to overcome learning difficulties. That's the power that gives children an extra toolkit, an extra push where they are struggling more than other children. And sometimes we have this idea of shame, poor you, you're going to have to work harder. Well, when hard work feels normal, isn't that wonderful? If your child needs to work harder in order to succeed at the level that other people are succeeding at who don't have to work that hard, if hard work feels normal, then it's not hard work. Then it's just their work. So the importance of framing failure and mistakes is massive, particularly for teachers who are teaching in a remedial, inclusive environment, and more importantly, for parents who have children who are struggling. Failure is not a label. It's a learning process. And I can talk a bit more to it, and perhaps I will in another podcast. But I hope you enjoyed this one.